doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is it all right with this light, do you think?
We can turn the light off also.
What does it look like off?
It looks very good. Nothing to worry about.
We weren't sure, off or on, never mind.
Yeah, no, so I think we're all ready to start. So over to you, Ambassador Pierce.
Kick right off then, Ananda, yes?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us at this very special event. And I would really like to congratulate and thank Playground Entertainment and the chairman of Playground Entertainment, Sir Colin Callender, for all his help in having this very special exclusive look at an episode of All Creatures Great and Small. And I'd like to pay particular tribute also to Nicholas Rife and Rachel Shenstone, who are the stars of the show, for all their fantastic work on it and for joining us today. Thank you very much for that. I think Brits and Americans share a very deep love of animals, and I think that really comes through in the show. I was a great fan of it when the books were written. It takes place in a part of the world near to where I grew up in the UK, so it has very special memories, but it is a very heartwarming set of stories, and I think that also comes through. But more importantly, even than these, I think it's really good and important that the show can tackle common agricultural challenges, common ways of looking after our animals, common ways of trying to get the best out of sustainable farming. And in that connection, it's absolutely wonderful also to be able to welcome the American Farm Bureau President, Zippy Duval, and NASDA's CEO, Dr. Barbara Glenn. So thank you so much for joining us today and for taking part in the panel discussion. I think 2020 was obviously a very difficult year for very many people, but this is a good opportunity to pay tribute to all those farmers and their workers, both in the US and in the UK, who kept things going, who kept enabling us to put food on the table, and who have done so much to look after the countryside and really work together as one unit. And it's interesting the way agriculture has long played a very important part in everybody's daily life. There was a radio show in the UK called The Archers that was introduced after the Second World War to help British farmers get to grips with challenges and new techniques. And while All Creatures Great and Small isn't a teaching program in that sense, it does really bring us all together to look after the countryside and to help us learn from each other in confronting the new challenges. As we recover from COVID in 2021, and as we try on both sides of the Atlantic to build up our economic resilience and build back better, being able to build back in a greener and more sustainable way is absolutely at the heart of this. And being able to cooperate on agriculture, on farming, on animal husbandry and animal welfare, these are very important themes on both sides of the Atlantic. And we really look forward to working with our US colleagues. A thank you again to Playground Entertainment and to All Creatures Great and Small for bringing us together. I'm delighted that the program is becoming so popular and that it's got such critical acclaim. I think that's really important. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Ananda Siram, who runs the arts side of our Consulate General, and Ananda is going to moderate this event. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Ambassador Pierce, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So as you see, we have a great dynamic, different panel than usual. And so we have a lot to get to, but so let's just kick off, let's go. So the first topic we'll talk about today is the role of farms and communities. So this is a show where, you know, in the community, farming is really central to it. And I want to go to you, Colin, for the first question. Just want to ask you, what made you interested in rebooting the show, and tell us about, bringing it all together, the research and what you had to, put into the show to make it as realistic as possible, which I think you've done really successfully.
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me thank Ambassador Pierce for hosting this and for sort of understanding the sort of deeper resonance of the show and the whole notion of the way the show speaks to farming and agriculture and sustainable living. Interestingly, the starting point for this grew out of Brexit, because what was clear in England at Brexit was that Britain was divided between the metropolitan centres and rural England. And if you remember, Brexit happened much at the same time as the 2016 election. And there was a similar sort of divide in the US between the big urban centres and the heartland of the country. And I was reminded when this happened of James Herriot's books, and remembered how they brought people together, and how that the themes of the books, the themes of community, the themes of people helping each other, the themes of living off the land and the challenges of living off the land, how that crossed all sort of economic strata and demographics when the series first came out many years ago. And of course, the books had been bestsellers for decades. And so it struck me that this was a good time to bring the series back, and hopefully in the process, bring the audience, the divided British audience, together again around one show. And who knew that when we did that, the show would be launched during COVID, when all those divisions and all those challenges would be accentuated. And as you say, as has been said, the show was a big hit in England, and I'm delighted to see that over here in America, it seems to have received seems to be receiving a similar sort of response, and that people are looking at this as a way of reminding ourselves of the sort of core values of community and friendship and family that we all believe in, whatever our political persuasions or whatever, wherever we sit within the sort of democratic, the sort of cross section of the country. And so that was the beginning of it. And I didn't realize, I don't think at the time realized it would speak so loudly and so resonantly to a contemporary audience.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we're definitely gonna talk more about positivity later on in this discussion. And so following up on that a little bit, so when you're, putting together the show and, thinking about just how to put together a farm in the 1930s, what was that process like in bringing in experts to talk about that?
What happened was when the books were written by an author called James Herriot. That's actually a pen name for a man called Alf White. And Alf White's son and daughter are alive and are the sort of look after his estate. His son Jim is a retired vet himself, and his daughter Rosie is a retired general practitioner doctor. And I went to go up to Yorkshire to meet them, and to meet them at the house where the veterinary practice was held. And in the course of showing me around the house and the little museum they've got there, they showed me into the room that held all the instruments, all the veterinary instruments. And it looked like a medieval torture chamber. It was, the instruments were, I mean, I don't even want to begin to describe them. It would make everyone run. But what it reminded me very graphically was how how the life living in Yorkshire when these books were set in the 1930s, and I venture to say, and this is no less true now than it was then, that life living off the land through certainly the English weather anyway, through winters and summers and falls and springs, was a physical, challenging existence. And for many people, their animals and the health of their animals was the difference between a livelihood and the poorhouse. And we wanted to make sure that when we made the series, that sense of the sort of mud under the fingernails and the real challenge, the real physical challenge of being on the farm and living off the land was part of the quality and the muscle of the show. So whether it's seeing Helen's character, whose mother has died, who is sort of basically both now a surrogate mother to her younger sister, but and sort of running the farm for her father, or James coming from Glasgow, the city of Glasgow, learning the ways of country life and country folk. That was understanding that and making that become real and come to life was very much part of the ambition of the series.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, great job. President Duval, speaking of the transition from medieval looking instruments, I know you've seen some of the show already. What do you think, or how would you say farming practices have changed since the show, takes place in the 1930s? How would you say farming practices and animal care has evolved since then?
Well, a lot of things never change, but some things do, and technology is some of those things that change along with it. But agriculture, farming, ranching is still very community oriented. The good example of that is our farmers and ranchers across the country have given back over $5 million to people in need during the pandemic, and over 1.5 million pounds of food and thousands of volunteer hours. So they're still very family oriented. But on my farm, if you ride in the picture you see in the background of my farm there, if you ride over it, it looks totally different than back in the 30s, because they were plowing with mules and not using cover crops. But now you see my fields are green even in the wintertime, because we can plant annual grasses there. We use comprehensive nutrient management plans so we can use the nutrients that the animals leave behind. We put it out at the right rate with our spreaders on GPS so we don't overlap, don't get too close to other areas. So we do it efficiently and very environmentally friendly. And then in our houses where we house our animals, they're all controlled by computers. And if something gets out of whack, whether it gets a little warm, a little stuffy, or whatever it might happen inside that house, it calls my cell phone or my farm manager's cell phone, and we run to the house to make sure that the animals are cared for perfectly. But as far as veterinarian work, my son's a veterinarian. And yeah, we have laid down behind cows in the muck and the mud to deliver calves and all that stuff. And the episode I watched last night was exactly that way. I never did it with a tie on, though.
Never did it with a tie on.
But so a lot of things have changed, but our farmers have they do adapt to the opportunity to take on new practices, to protect their workers, to provide the animals with the best environment they can live in, hire the best veterinarians that they can take care of them for them and take in all the advice that they give us. And then, of course, using all the mechanical technologies to be able to take care of our environment, our water and our air. Because these farms, I'm third generation on this farm, and my goal is to leave it in better shape than my dad left it to me. And I think my veterinary son will have the same approach. And it's just amazing how we have evolved. Farmers have worked for decades to improve their land and be more environmentally friendly. We are the first environmentalists, and we're proud to be that. But bottom line is, we're all about protecting the animals, the people that work with us, the land, the environment, our community, and then, of course, our families, and provide the safest, best food that we can provide our country and the rest of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you make a great point. At the end of the day, farmers are providing for all of us, for the world, for their families, for their neighbors and community. And Dr. Glenn, just to follow up on that point, it feels like people are more aware of what they eat these days and the impact that they are having on the planet. And so I want to ask you, do you think that that translation is going into the appreciation of farmers that we're seeing, you know, in our communities?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sir Colin, for telling us about the story of the show. It was really rewarding. Zippy's farm is about on the opposite end of the Glenn family farm, which is only about 7 acres. So, but we also adopt that high regard for you know, healthy animals, healthy environment. Yes, absolutely. I see a greater appreciation by the consumer for farmers right now, and I think it's all because we're in a new environment of community. We respect community. We've talked about that. Sir Colin laid that out very nicely. It's about compassion. It's about, you know, working together in a culture that you know, regards the shared values that we all have. So we're all working in a community, and the way consumers have been reaching out, trying to learn about their food is to farmers, and farmers have been telling their story to consumers for during my career, I'd say for at least the last half of it. And it's very rewarding because we can share those new technologies that Zippy mentioned, those new methods for growing safe produce and raising healthy animals. And we're doing that all while we're protecting the environment. So I think farmers really are in it to nurture the environment, number one. We always wanted to keep our animals as healthy as we possibly could. You have a relationship with these animals and you want to nurture that. And so as James Harriet on the show, and then Helen Alderson, she's the farmer, they understand the value of the animals on the show. And in real life, farmers and veterinarians are intimately aware of that relationship. So we have healthy animals, we have healthy environment and healthy people, and that interconnectivity is always a part of agriculture.
Great, thank you so much. And perfect segue to my question to Nick and Rachel. So I think in the first episode, Nick, your character is on a bus in the Dales. He's reading a book about animals, and there's someone on the bus who's just like, put that book down and look around you. You know, you learn everything you need to know just looking around. And so, you know, with that in mind, with both of you guys on set and just being with animals, being in that, you know, type of environment, what would you say that you learned from your experiences working with animals and being on set?
I think first and foremost, just how well they were trained. They were trained impeccably well. And I mean, for me and Rach as well, that was great because I not only had to simulate birthing a calf, but I had to be, you know, pretend to be kicked in the face by a horse. And that was all in episode 1. So it was really important that they were trained quite well. And they certainly were. But we also had an on-set vet, Andy Barrett, who was a local vet up where we were filming. We also had an independent animal welfare officer, and also then the wranglers, animal trainers, and the wranglers. So the animals were, you know, treated with complete respect and dignity throughout the shoot, which was brilliant as well. It made us all feel really comfortable when working with them. But I mean, you also had to be on your toes with these animals because they would absolutely steal the scene. There's a little Pekingese, a little ball of fur called Tricky Woo, who crops up in the 2nd episode. It was just out recently. Played by the dog actor is called Derek. So you never really imagine this little ball of fur to be called Derek. But when working with little Del Boy, he's a complete scene stealer. So unless you're bringing your A game with little Del Boy, nobody's looking at you. So, but they were just a complete pleasure to work with from start to finish. I'm glad I didn't have to work with Clive the Bull though, and Rachel had a lot to do with him. So.
I sure did. Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Nick said, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm such a huge animal lover, and I think for me, you can learn such a lot from them, and you know, sort of philosophically, I guess, but patience and being present, because you know they're long days and it's freezing, and you know, and you never see any of them like scrolling Instagram or asking for coffee. They're just absolutely fine to just be there and be present. And I think we as actors can probably learn a lot from that, really. That, and I've learned lots of practical skills, like how to pick up a chicken very quickly if necessary, if it's running away. And, you know, I've also learned that Clive, the bull, whose real name's Jester, if you tickle his ears, this huge bull that weighs nearly 2 tons, he reacts very similarly to my tiny little Maltese dog, which is just to sort of nuzzle in a little bit for a bit more. So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I also find it interesting how, you know, obviously they have their actor names and then their real names, and, you know, getting them to respond to the, you know, tricky woo, you know, is, I'm sure.
I actually think that the Jester, the bull, I mean, I think he's got a better CV than me. He's been in so many things. Like he's done so much telly.
Keen-eyed fan would have noticed as well that Eric, as Tricky Woo, was in the credits at the end of episode 2 they aired the other night. So, you know, they're pride of place, definitely. Real stars of the show.
Amazing. So switching gears, we're going to talk a little bit more about, well, the pandemic, just because, you know, it's what's on everyone's mind. It's affecting us all. And, you know, all of our industries, whether it be farming, agriculture, TV, everything is so different. We're all doing different roles, but have this common experience of, you know, how we're living and adapting to COVID-19. And that's, you know, not just physical, you know, shutdowns and staying at home, but also the mental aspect as well. You know, we're not just in this global pandemic, it is a mental health crisis that we're going through. And it, you know, that ties into how all of our industries have been impacted. And so President Duval, I do want to ask you, you know, how has the pandemic affected farmers and food supply chains?
Well, farmers really, you know, when you're out here on the farm like I have, you got up at 2:30 in the morning, you milked 300 cows, worked all day and milked 300 again in the afternoon. And the day ended about time to dark, when you got dark, and you got in the house and the kids a lot of time already in bed. That hadn't changed. People still having to work hard. And now you just had to live with the fear of either you contracting the disease, or one of your workers getting the virus, and really putting a hardship in a day, because if someone couldn't work, or if some member of your family couldn't work, then somebody had to work twice as hard. So that really hadn't changed. It just made us a lot more fearful. And you talked about that stress that goes along with pandemic, and farmers have had a lot of that. But what added on top of that, we had several natural disasters across the country, which added stress. We also seen our markets change. All of a sudden, markets that for just-in-time agriculture totally went away. And it was just in case that we had just in case we had a situation like this. How do you switch from just in time to just in case and make it all happen? So there was some disruptions, and it wasn't because of lack of food. There's plenty of food out there, but from the farm to the shelf in our grocery stores, there were some bumps in the roads. And we saw that at American Farm Bureau and realized, you know, hey, we need to tell the American people and the rest of the world, we're still going to go to work. We're going to go to work every day and still provide food. So we started #StillFarming. And I hope all of you have seen that. It's touched over 90 countries. We touched over 100 million people with it. And it's gave us a perfect platform like this show to talk about agriculture, talk about how agriculture has doubled its renewable fuel sources on our farms through geothermal, solar, hydro, methane, so many different ways we've been able to do that. We put over 140 million acres in conservation programs to protect our land and make us more sustainable. And that's the size of New York and California put together in conservation programs. So it's given us a platform to talk about the great things that agriculture have done for decades and what we're going to continue to do in the future to be able to be sustainable, be friendly to our environment, and continue to provide the great food that we all are spoiled with each and every day here in America and across a lot of parts of the world.
And thank you so much for that as well. And following up with Dr. Glenn, I keen to hear your reflections on that as well, and how you think the consumer has reacted to the different issues faced with production, and also there's the successes, because personally I feel like I didn't even see that much of a blip, but in the beginning of the pandemic is rough, and it turned into a gradual adaptation, and everyone get working through it and providing. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, well, I choose to believe that consumers have learned a lot more about where their food comes from. And so I think now more than ever, we feel that connection and that community we just talked about earlier. And so the immediate reaction when the pandemic hit and we had to stay locked down was, where am I going to get my food? And people, for the first time, many turned to local farmers markets. And so local food was key to the sustainability of their lives and for their families. And so I know our state departments of agriculture in the United States immediately pivoted to set up amazing sort of matchmaking websites where food banks could go to find great products, produce and milk and other products, meat products, so that they could bring to the food banks so they could help feed the hungry. So our food supply did stay strong. We had a few bumps along the road, but aren't we proud that in the United States and in Britain, our consumers were confident that they could get the food that they needed to nourish themselves and their families. And I do want to do a shout out to Zippy. Their leadership with #StillFarming was absolutely amazing. I'm a member of a Maryland Farm Bureau and a proud one, as well as working for NASDA. And the #StillFarming, I think, was a prime example of bringing consumers together with farmers, and we need to just continue to do that. So I think in the end of the day, consumers need to hear from farmers, and we need to continue to tell our story now more than ever. I think that's one of the silver linings, if you will, if I can say that, of the pandemic.
No, thank you. And there's been so much talk about the unsung heroes of the pandemic, and you talk about people who work in grocery stores and people who are delivering and food and everything, and you wouldn't have that without farmers and departments of agriculture and food banks, and it's just so glad to just thank you in person. Thank you both so much.
I mean, I think one of the things the pandemic has done is it is sort of it has made people reassess the things that they took for granted and never thought about, and suddenly understand the value of different sectors of the society that maybe no one ever thought about. And certainly still farming, I think, was a brilliant move on your part to sort of remind people what you were doing. And it is an extraordinary accomplishment that food was that no stores went unstocked with food, that people were, those food banks, even to this day, the lines along for some of those food banks are quite shocking. And without the work you've done with the farming community, we'd never be able to supply those. So let me echo, Amanda, that the thanks to you. And as I say, I do think people have realized their reliance now on the farming community and the farming world in a way that they probably never did before.
Yeah, I think Nicholas and Rachel, you should know that the show is going to be part of the healing process to continue to, as Sir Colin said, bring food to hungry people, because we still have them. So it's a great opportunity to share that story.
Yeah, and just to also say, we're all spending so much time at home and, trying to, find ways to take up time and everything. And let's be honest, I think we're all spending a lot more time streaming, watching TV, movies, and everything.
Well, Amanda, let me just say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want, it's a point I wanted to raise, because one of the things that I was reminded of when I revisited the books and thought about adapting was that the original series went out at a time when families would watch television together. And grandparents and parents and their kids would watch a show together. And this was one of those shows. And I had no idea that we would be able to replicate that. But certainly one of the hopes that we had was that this would be a show that families could watch together. And of course, then because of COVID and because people were kids and grandparents and families were sort of all under one roof. That's exactly what's happened. And I've had numerous emails from kids, from grandparents saying they watched the show with their grandchildren, from kids saying they watched their shows with their parents. And one of the gratifying things has been, this really has been a show that families have been able to come and watch together, and the parents with no fear that there would be something on screen that would be inappropriate or age inappropriate. And people have really been able to come together and enjoy the show as a family, and that's been an unexpected benefit, a plus of the whole COVID experience. Not one I would have expected to have, but that's certainly been the case.
Sir Colin, could I tell you, as I watched last night, all I could think about was I couldn't wait to watch it with my grandchildren.
Oh, there you go.
The whole time I was watching, because I have a granddaughter that wants to be a veterinarian and she loves animals. And I said, she is going to love this, and her mom and daddy's going to be glad to have something she can watch.
Yeah. How lovely. How old is your granddaughter?
She's 13. I have a 10-year-old grandson, and then I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, and then I have some others in other families. So. My daughter has two too. So.
Oh, that's I mean, that is perfect. Thank you, Colin. Perfect segue into my next question, and it's all about the increased appetite for positivity, and I know the term is I think I've been seeing is positive escapism, but it's more just along the lines of how audiences are looking for more positivity in television and movies, and you've seen over the last couple of years this trend has been developing. And I know you talked about how you started developing this show after, you saw The Division, in the UK, and, obviously it relates to the US as well. But do you think that this trend of positivity will continue past post-pandemic life?
I do. I think it's more than just positivity, or I think because there's a sense in which positivity could be deemed to be sort of simplistic and sort of in one sense and naive, because the world isn't, even the best of times the world is tough, and even in the best of times everyone's trying to get through the day with dignity. What I think is important about this show, and what I think works, is that it reminds people of the small acts of generosity and friendship that happens between people that at times in the world we live in now, we've tended to forget about. There's a scene in the last episode, in episode 7, in which, for those of you that have seen the show, the housekeeper, Mrs. Hall, expected or hoped her son, who she's fallen out with, would come to visit her for Christmas, and he hasn't done. And she's in midnight mass, and she's singing the hymn, and she begins to cry. And Siegfried, whose house it is, of the senior vet, arrives in the church, and he's a very sort of contained man. He's not a man to sort of be generous, particularly with his emotions. But he sees that she's crying, and he puts his hand on her hand in the scene. And it's the smallest of gestures. And in a micro, tiny way, to me, that moment speaks to what's at the core of the show. And what's been true in England and America through the pandemic, if you cut through all the sort of the horrific numbers and all the politics, people on the ground, communities all over the country, in England and America, have acted with generosity and great heart to help people out in small, sort of unpretentious and non-glamorous ways, whether it's leaving food on someone's doorstep, whether it's helping out with the kids, or whatever it is. And I think it's the celebration of that, those small moments of humanity, of genuine connection between people, that makes this show powerful. It's not positivity in and of itself. It's to do with rediscovering the humanity between and the decency in everyday lives that somehow has got lost in the sort of, both in England and in America. And I think what I think people want is to rediscover that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just going back to Nick and Rachel, just talking about the positivity of the show and what people have been really into the last couple years. What do you think it is about this story, even though we've talked about this show takes place in the 30s, and there might not be that many people that remember this time, but what is it about this story that you think resonates with audiences?
Nick, I mean, do you want me to go? Do you want me to
Yeah,
go?
both of you, whichever one.
Carry on, Rachel.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I mean, I think Colin put it beautifully, really. But I think that there is a simplicity to the stories that Alf White wrote. But they're rich in simplicity, and I think we strip it all back, and we remember what it's about, and it's love. It's love for each other, for the animals, for the community, and it's the strongest thing that we have. And I think, yeah, just to echo what Colin said, it's been a reminder of that, really, of the simplicity.
Yeah, I think as well, just going off the back of that, these stories, they're so full of charm and wit and warmth. But one minute you'll be laughing out loud, but the next minute you can be really touched. And I think there's a truth in these stories because they're semi-autobiographical, and because these biographical, because these characters are so three-dimensional, because they were real people, and because the relationships are so strong. You hope that people can identify in that, and in these people, in these characters, and within that, there's this great truth, as I was saying, because you not only have these moments of joy and optimism, and I think it's a show with so much hope, but you also have moments of melancholy, because that's life. And you have these characters that are so complex and multifaceted. And again, we're showcasing that. There's no character in the show that is in any way two-dimensional. So yeah, I think it being steeped in this kind of truth that people can really identify with is a huge part of why it's so popular as well.
I also think there's an element of escapism. We've all been physically locked in, not being able to go anywhere. So to be able to sort of hang out in the Dales, in the beautiful countryside, with these characters in the 1930s has been a break. It's a bit of of escapism to be around those characters and be in that environment, really. And the Dales, like we always say, as a sort of character within itself in the stories, it's so very important. And yeah, so I think that's another reason, the physical bit of it.
There's this amazing quote that I saw in Variety in a review of the show, and I think they called it the show like gripping a warm cup of tea and settling into an amazing, like, cozy British snow globe. And I think that just sums it up so well. But that does conclude our panel. I want to thank for joining us for this. I will hand it over to Colin to intro the episode. Just to also do a quick shout out and tune in Sundays at 9 p.m. to watch the show as it airs. And over to you, Colin.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Amanda. So I'm not sure if everyone has seen the first episode. What we're going to show you now is episode 4. So episode 2 went out over the weekend, and episode 3 is next weekend, and then episode 4 is the one we thought we'd show you, because this is the episode that features Dame Diana Rigg, and it's basically her last major screen performance. God bless her. And it was a total joy to work with her on the show. She plays Mrs. Pomfrey, who has the little dog Tricky Woo, otherwise known as Derek, that Nicholas referred to earlier. And just to set it up, the story so far. So Nicholas plays James Herriot, who is a young vet from Scotland, and he's come down to the Yorkshire Dales to live in this house with Mrs. Hall, the housekeeper, Siegfried Farnan, who runs the pet veterinary practice, and Siegfried Farnan's younger brother, Tristan. And meanwhile, Nicholas is falling in love, although he doesn't really know it yet, or maybe he does, and Rachel doesn't know it, or maybe she does. They are falling in love with each other along the way. So this is an episode that is about Mrs. Pomfrey, who has been over pampering her Tricky Woo, feeding her all the wrong things, and doing everything wrong with the dog. And the dog has come to James for some help. So this is the episode. And as Amanda said, you can catch the series on PBS at 9 o'clock on Sunday nights. And I hope you enjoy it.